Om Badram Karnebihi Shrunayam Devaha Badram Pashyema Sabhye Yajatraha Sthirai Angas Tusto Vamsas Tanubihi Vyasema Devihitam Yad Ayuhu. May all the forces of nature hear what is auspicious with our ears. We who are worthy of worship, may we see with our own eyes what is auspicious. May we enjoy the life allotted to us by the deities, offering praise with our bodies that are strong of limb and strong of will. So we are resuming a study of the Prasna Upanishad, Prasna meaning question. 6 questions are being asked. I have a phrase, if you have no questions, then no answers come forth. And so we covered briefly, I think up to about the 4th question, that needs a further study because the first few questions are preliminary, supplementary questions, dealing only with the surface of things, and handled in such a way that every inquiry becomes a step-by-step process, so that generally we can go from the outside to the inside. That makes it easy for us to understand. A minimalist answer with a minimalist question that could actually be very profound. But by giving a minimalist answer, then we can get at least a foot on the rung of our journey. So just to remind you, the first question was very simple, but yet very profound. And people are still trying to figure out the answer. How did life begin? Now, if you take that as a biological question, then the answer in modern science is nowhere to be found. What is called a biogenesis. How chemistry can organize itself somehow and turn out to be a thinking man or woman. But that is not how it's taken, and nor is it how it's asked. It is meant everything that we know, what we call life in general, how did this begin? And so just discussing informally before we did this live broadcast, it was said, well, 2 answers are there to this question. One can be put with a standard cosmological answer saying it came from a big explosion, a big bang somewhere, and from that everything else came. That's one way of answering it. But it doesn't really tell us anything profound, because it doesn't tell us, so space and time came from where, and we have 3 options, and I presented these previously, I'll present them again. Either nothing made something from nothing, or something made something from nothing. This is a theological position. Or something made something from itself. Something was an efficient and material cause. And so the answer comes. If you want to know how did life begin, there was an entity called Prajapati, a lord of all beings, standing there in potentiality, equivalent to the creator. The difference, though, is it's creating something from itself. Having a wish, a desire for diversification, that entity wants themselves to diversify, and it comes out as 2 entities that interplay with each other. They're called Rai and Prana. And unlike the later Shaktiism, that is identifying the energetic dynamic side of this divinity in a feminine aspect, this Rai is put as feminine, and the energy side itself is. The prana is deemed to be masculine. This is a Vedic way of expressing it, because do we have any examples of energy and matter? Yes, the sun and the moon. So the sun is seen to be the embodiment of energy, and the moon is just a rock. all the moon rocks that were brought back by astronauts walking on the surface of the moon. And they will tell you, and there's even evidence that maybe the moon has more of a relationship to the earth than anything else, since it probably was fallout from the earth itself. Anyway, look at this divine arrangement which is there. The sun being a life giver, it's very natural to worship this entity as a great, great symbol of the divine. The well-known Gayatri Mantra is a great, great example of this kind of analogy. Seeing that we require some symbol for divinity, we can praise this as some entity that lights the sun and lights all other shining things. So how did life begin? Yes. And then we can take the moral lesson that if you are a good person, that is a person who living an ordinary life concerned with the material things of life still, as is natural for many people, then you go along the northern course or the southern course of the sun. That is, the year is observed to have a sun seemingly moving in the northern direction or in a southern direction. So the southern path are for those who seek the ultimate self. There's a spiritual path. It requires some discipline. But the northern part, that is the southern part, for those ordinary people. But the northern path is one of knowledge, requiring these disciplines I mentioned, brahmacharya, tapas, shraddha, faith, and so on. All of this is there. So these two paths are distinguished. You can say summer and winter, if you will. So waiting for the northern path and the southern path, we find how this is true in the Bhagavad Gita, how this great grandsire, Bhishma, lying on his bed of arrows, was waiting for the proper course in order to leave his body. So, moral training and education in different ways, leading a relatively good life but concerned with matter, will take us along one course. Symbolically termed the moon, in that way also, and others moving toward the sun, symbolically to that spirit. So just to remind you of the first question, and also some of the symbols which are there, beautiful, but basically telling us that the origin of everything is this creative cosmic mind, otherwise also called Brahma, or the womb of all beings, Hiranyagarbha. So we find also a number of symbolical mythological assertions. For example, the sun is ultimately the giver of rain. You might not see the connection, but it's only with the sun's heat that water evaporates from the oceans, collects in a gaseous form, a steam form, if you will, a cloudy form, and when the pressure increases, it comes down as rain. So it's not such an odd, out of order statement to say that the sun is giver of rain. And it races across the sky as an old image, not only there, but also in other cultures, Greco-Roman cultures, the idea of a sun like a chariot crossing the sky with 7 wheels and 6 spokes. 7 wheels are half years, because we can divide the year into half years, this northern and southern course also. Seasons, months are there. Half months are also there, as significant as divided into the dark fortnight and the bright fortnight. And then days, nights, and what is called a measurement, muhurta, and that is a Vedic era division of time. It equals about 48 minutes. And when you calculate it all, it's asserted to be, let's say, 1/30th of a day, broken down in this way. And then the 6 spokes, that symbolism is the practice of seeing the sun with these 6 potentials, or responsible for 6 earthly seasons, and yet not affected by any of them. 5 seasons, I should say. 5 seasons on earth would be, naturally, summer, winter, spring, autumn, as we know it in some countries, but additionally the rainy season also. So to make a 6th one for the sun, that is not affected by any of them. So you can see wonderful symbolism that traces back to Vedic times. Then to go along the proper path, which traces back to the real source, the Atman, which is also identified with Brahman. Over and above Prajapati, seeing what is your actual origin. Truthfulness is required, cultivation of that, chastity, austerity, meditation, perseverance, all these qualities are there. And then the avoidance, of course, of other things, falsehood, lying. We can think of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, and we can equate some of these great cultivating factors, cultivating personality in a moral and ethical way. We shouldn't cheat anybody. We should have this morality, no crookedness in us, no ethical obliqueness or hidden thing, no intent to not do the right thing. All the morals and ethics that we find in every civilization and in every religion also. And one other thing, the absence of delusion. This is an additional thing, because if we go along all the moral paths but don't include this one, we won't get there, because what is hiding from the intimate association or realization of the inner self is delusion. We are deluded by a kind of cloud that we call Maya. The delusion that says that we are individual, that we are real, we are permanent, even though we know we are not. Then the next question will be, on from that, well, what is a living being? We know what the source is, but what is a living being? And that also has a number of sub-questions to it, just to remind you. How many are the deities? Deities, to clear up any misunderstanding, is seen in its absolute pristine form, not in its misunderstood form, its distorted form. Many non-Hindus will say, oh, polytheistic religion, you believe in so many deities, so many gods. But Deva means an illuminating factor. And the illuminating factor in the body, the factors of information, are not the external senses. These are the internal indriyas, the internal senses, and therefore part of the mind. So how many of these, and how do they uphold all living beings, and how do they manifest power? These are also subsidiary questions. And finally, which one is the best? And we discovered that of all of them, this prana, this energy, carrying on the theme of the first question, this prana is the king of all, because when that decides to go up and go off and leave, then all the others have to leave, because essentially they are subsidiaries of this great energy. So that brings us then, that the breath, the spirit, diversified in all these different ways, this becomes the great thing. And when this life force leaves the body, then all the other deities have to leave, one by one. These hearing leaves, seeing leaves. You can see this gradual extraction from a dying person. And then, of course, it is the Upanishadic habit to extrapolate this to a global situation, a universal situation, incorporating all radiance, incorporating the sun that is symbolic of the earth, incorporating space, incorporating wind, But these are not literal things. So these are the 5 basic elements. Energetically, scientifically, these are represented by gravitational energy or potential energy, kinetic energy, radiation, and electromagnetism. When we talk about the weak and strong nuclear forces, I believe these are really subsidiaries of electrical forces. Then we come to the third question, just to remind you. What is the nature of man? And how is it so? How does it operate in this way? How does a person arrive and function like a person? So these are all essentially physical questions with the inference of some spiritual entity behind it. So, from where is life born? And when born, how does it come into the body? And when it's entered the body, how does it stay there? How does it abide? How does it go out of the body in death? How does life interface its relation with the nature and the senses? And how does life interface with what we call the internal self, having understood that there is such an entity? And so the sage to whom these responses belong to, and whose Upanishad this is, Pipalada, he states that these questions are quite difficult now. Increasing difficulty is there, but given the students' past curiosities about Brahman, now for the first time, we're seeing now closer and closer to the deeper questions and answers of life. You see, we assume that we are born and we die, but supposing we attribute this only to the body and the energy within it, the question then doesn't arise. Where are you born? How were you born? Supposing you're not born, then you won't die. The question of death itself doesn't arise. Life enters the body, says this Upanishad, and this answer to this question. How? Again, a subtle play is there. By the act of the mind. The mind is more subtle than the senses. And so it governs the body by delegating work to all the other organs, like managers, like petty chiefs or petty governing officers. And here we can think then of the Katha Upanishad with its beautiful imagery of this body being something like a city. And then within it, of course, 7 specialized areas are there, the head. And the human body, of course, is seen to function like a kingdom with the internal entity governing body as a king. And we can see some of the images there, physiological images from the very ancient Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which asserts, for example, that the human body has a heart, which is really the principal organ, seen to be like that. It's the organ of the soul, it's the seat of all our experience, and from there, radiating from there, arises something like 101 major arteries, and each major artery will divide into 100 times and then subdivide into 72,000 smaller arteries or avenues or channels, giving a total of something like 727 million. Small arteries, large arteries, combinations of these, and these diffuse oxygen throughout the body. These diffuse life throughout the body. And it is this life breath which interfaces with the self. Because the living, breathing thing that we register as a human is very complex. And it is through this complexity, through investigating this life force, and in a meditation way, withdrawing through these arteries into a specialized entity or specialized space that is there for meditation purposes, where the self resides. In Upanishads, we tell the size of our thumb. It is not that this eternal self has any size at all, but we have to conceive of it in some way. And so the self to all the organs and life in the human body, this is all covered by this Upanishad, using various symbolic phrases, relying on some ancient texts, and using the phrase the 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, mouth, and so on, bringing a kind of physiological image or picture to this profound metaphysical question. But now we really have the deeper questions coming up. And this is where we deal with this fourth question. Now, the fourth question is really a list of 5 questions. The basic question is, what establishes man? What is the real foundation of man? We know how this works and so on. This has been explained, and brief oblique references have been made to this internal Atman, this self. But really, what establishes the self? And there are subsidiary questions here too. What is the proof of this? So 5 questions, subsidiary in nature, that are really most profound and require profound and detailed explanation. What sleeps in man? When man goes to sleep, is there some entity that stays awake? What is awake therein? When man sleeps, what goes away? And then sleep comes on board. What is that? And which deity or series of illuminating factors, lighting things? What lamps are there? What organs are still alive in man when man goes into a dream? How is it that man sees in a dream? Now, don't forget that this is from the same Untitled Veda that the preceding Mandukya Upanishad comes from, that deals purely with the subject of waking, dream, and dreamless sleep, and bypasses the question, what happens after death? Well, you're assuming there's a death, but supposing there's an entity that stays awake, like a station master viewing and witnessing 3 separate trains coming and going, standing on the platform, not coming with the first train, not going with the last train, standing there, blowing the whistle, receiving 1 train coming, let's say goods train, all the things offloaded. A good example, good analogy, was a goods train will have some commercial value. Let's call it a waking state of people and places and events with a certain individual perspective related to it, something that we identify as body and mind, and observing all the other people and places and events and setting up a relationship with all of these entities and acting and reacting and full of pain and difficulty and sorrow, and within a framework of time, within a framework of space, and within a framework of function. Nama Rupa Kriya. With all within the framework of movement, a sense of movement, giving us a linear sense of time. This event happened here, another event happens after that, something happened before that, something is happening now. And all the objects which are there. Space. You can't have objects without space. Take a space away, all objects have just disappeared. And so what is it in man that experiences happiness? We find happiness, in a certain sense, when all of this time and space goes, even when the dream goes. And on what is all this founded? These are now the very, very profound questions. And the whole Prasna Upanishad begins, in terms of this answer, with a simile. You state the background of the extent theory before offering its own explanations. So it says, like rays of the sun that withdraw into the disk as it sets and that disperse ever more as it rises, all the deities, that means all the sensory organs, all the illuminating factors inside man withdraw and become one with the highest shining one, that is the mind. So from the mind, all these things come out, same thing as the idealist thinks, and they all go into the mind, and it is the mind that is operating. When this mind is not moving, then what? So other people, some say that this is withdrawn into this thing called the mind. And other people say that these deities that reside inside man, other than the deity of the mind, they stop working in this state. In the state of what? In the state of sleep. And in this state, the essence of a person also sleeps. So this fourth question, this fourth Prasna, is presenting something called a 5-fire theory. That is pointing out that prana, breath, life force, the theme that all this began with, doesn't sleep at all. That the mind sacrifices food stored in the body with air provided by breath in order to serve the mind, keeping it going. The dream states, the Prasna Upanishad here, is a form of enjoyment for the mind. What a delightful way. Of course, some people have nightmares, but you see, when you study dream, an art that is largely lost, you'll see that it is a witness looking at it. And from the witness point of view, there's a certain delight in it. And we know how dreams can be fascinating, how they can be full of imagination, how a person can fly, how a person unmarried can be a king with a queen and a palace and live for 1,000 years. How any fancy can be entertained simply by mobilizing the mind in fancies. Another state, of course, is there, meditation. If we can define meditation as a planned dream, we ourselves can manufacture any fantasy that we like and use it to steer the mind inward to a state of poise equivalent to a dreamless sleep, and then consciously paint on the blank canvas that we have, a process called dharana, concentration, that leads us inward where no thought or only one thought is there. Only one thought being available, a constant flow, and then that can yield to experience of pure being. That is the foundation that we have discovered when we say this and when we answer this question and attend to it. So the second train can also come, and the station master can stand on the platform, and we can imagine it in this way as defined here, that is a form of enjoyment for the mind. You can see passengers coming and going, getting off the train, getting back on. Station master blows the whistle and that train goes off. So far, the station master never boarded the train, never left the train. It never came, it never went. And then finally, another train comes along. Its carriage is completely empty, nothing there, equivalent to dreamless sleep. Still the station master not involved in any of them, standing on the platform. Now, if we can get used to this idea, these profound questions of birth, life, and death don't arise, and the fear of them also doesn't arise. So these are elucidated in very, very great detail in the Mandukya Upanishad. So when the mind configures and reconfigures events from the waking state, from memory, experiencing it in new ways, never seen before, or either recently or in the past, says this Upanishad, either this life or another birth, whether true or untrue, it makes no difference. Sacha or ashacha, whether heard or unheard, whether pleasant or unpleasant. In dream, the mind beholds all of these things. But there is a deep sleep state that we just described, equivalent to the blank goods train with no goods present, but still observed as a kind of peace, no second being there, where impressions all end and the mind too falls asleep. Even the mind goes to sleep without any impressions. And this is the complete state of mind, where the potentiality, previously described as Prajapati, not willing anything, simply stands. From this point of view, one who understands this witness position will say, only God stands there. What is deep sleep is not I slept, not I went to a blank, but I lay contentedly on the divine lap. I sat where God sits. So this is the complete state of mind, relaxation of body, happiness. And it is then when everything in a person retires into Atman, Brahman, including the matter and the elements of matter, this Rai, this energy, this prana, water, elements of water, light, elements of light, eye, what is visible, ear, what is audible, smell, and the objects of smell, taste and objects, all of these things, all of the senses, 10 senses of them, are all withdrawn. And like feet being moved internally, being withdrawn, like a tortoise who's withdrawing limbs into its own shell, hands are withdrawn, what is seizable is withdrawn, mind is withdrawn, objects in the mind are withdrawn, thought is withdrawn, reason is withdrawn, self-consciousness and the objects of self-consciousness is no longer there. Insight, objects of illumination, life force, objects of life force, all set like the sun setting. And we have this described also in a conversation with the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. When the sun sets, see, when everything sets, now also when the senses set, then what is there? So after setting the foundation of its dream theory, this Prasna and the answer to it puts out this theory of dream and also deep sleep, and then defines Atman as the real self, the real person, the Purusha, real person, the cosmic self, consciousness, the soul of all beings, the universal principle, not only in you but everywhere, the cosmic witness. And it is that one that beholds, that hears, that smells, touches, perceives, thinks, reasons, conceives at the foundation level, whose essence is consciousness or knowledge, this eternal self. This is the foundation of our being. This is the ground of all being, pure consciousness. Very often now in popular literature, conveyed in those terms. What is the ground of all being? What is the foundation of all being? What is the root of all being? You use an analogy of a tree. What is the root from which the whole tree comes? What is that? Its foundation and dwelling is the supreme, its indestructible soul. So this is now the fourth question. And the answer to that is that happiness and bliss in man is this established calm state of knowing and dwelling in this eternal self, in this Atman. Previously, he thought it was in physical food, it was in energy, it was an expenditure of this energy. But now we come to this foundation. What is the very, very foundation, the platform? What is the ground of our being? And then the spiritual state is there of truth, of beauty, of goodness. That is your real nature. So this fourth question is asked and answered in a very, very beautiful way, in a very detailed way. Now I have bypassed all the Sanskrit texts in this, but we can easily go back and see what is the significance. First of all, the question 4 really is concerning sleep and the ultimate basis of things. And this question is asked by Gargya, grandson of Surya, significantly. The question literally went like this. It went that, Venerable Sir, and here we find also, see, reference to Bhagwan is used in that text, not just Lord, but the one who understands all the lordly things is also described, the teacher is also described as Bhagwan. Itasmin purushe kani swapanti kanyasmin jagrati katara esha deva swapnam pashyati Kashaitat sukham bhavati kasmin no sarve sampratishtita bhavanti iti. What is the deity that sees the dreams? Whose is this happiness? In whom are all these established? So we go on like that and we deal with dreamless sleep, as we mentioned. He is truly in the seer, the toucher, the hearer, the smeller, and so on. And then that leads us to question 5. Atahainam shebhyas satya kamaha papracha sayo haiva tad Bhagavan, again, teachers referred to as Bhagavan, manusyesu prayanantam omkaram. What is this omkara? This is a question from Satyakama, son of Shibi. We see him in a number of the Upanishads. Venerable Sir, Bhagavan, what world does he who among men meditates on the symbol Om until the end of his life? In short, what is meditation? And why do we meditate? And why do we use the Omkara, the Om symbol of this? Bearing in mind that this question is dealt with exclusively in the Mandukya Upanishad. So the sound symbol Om, very ancient symbol. Now on the meditation course that we did over the weekend, a question arose. Somebody had said that you cannot repeat the Gayatri Mantra. It's too sacred. It can only be done by initiated people, and we can do it, at the thread ceremony, age of 9, where it's whispered in the air, and so sacred it is, we daren't touch it. But then more sacred than that is the sound symbol Om. Should you never say Om? Now, I think most people will agree we should say Om. And Patanjali also says in his Yoga Sutras, as part of his meditation guidelines, that this great, great entity, who is worthy of adoration because he's a great teacher, teacher of all teachers, we should meditate on that. The sound symbol of that is Om, and we should repeat it and meditate on its meaning also. Granted that, we have to be qualified to do it. What is the qualification? All spiritual practice requires an entity, somebody who is a student, who has a thirst for it. But if you don't have a thirst, you won't even make the inquiry, never mind the pursuit. So it's taken for granted that all the preliminaries have been gone through, that you are a worthy student, that you are pure in mind, at least with pure intention. Even though humanity will say, and human beings will say, if I set the ideal, I may not fully live up to it. Still, I will strive. I will still be a seeker. I will still make the effort. And we know that from human experience, that in making an effort with all the resolve in the world, the effect or the result will never be linear. Not in a straight line anyway. It'll be linear in its trend. It'll be up and a little down, but the general trend should be upwards. Our humanity is such that we will fail sometimes, but we continue until we get the habit. One of the answers to the question, why should we meditate? In order to get the habit of meditation. Once you got the habit of meditation, then you won't even ask the question. It'll be like breathing. You can't live without it. So in this 5th section, the question is that if a human being sincerely meditates on the symbol Om until his death, what would be the result of it, what we have obtained by it. And it's asserting that one who meditates to know the soul of the self, Atman, Brahman, bearing in mind that people do take up meditation for copious other reasons, peace of mind and so on. But the Katha Upanishad and the Bhagavad Gita are very clear. Self-control is necessary, and from self-control you'll get peace of mind. From peace of mind you can meditate. But without meditation you won't get peace of mind. So this section is asserting that somebody who meditates to know their internal self or God, this Atman Brahman, then metaphorically it's presenting different levels of meditation. Going inward by understanding what the three components of this Om stand for. So 3 levels of the soul knowledge is there, the lowest being partial, from meditating on the first level, which is this A. Don't forget, represented in the Mandukya Upanishad as representing the waking world, the waking state. A state where we consider this to be the normal, real state of things. But from a philosophical, analytical point of view, from the station master point of view, we know it's only one phase. 3 pages of a book are there, waking, dream, and dreamless sleep. And we turn the pages every day, every night in human waking time. And all the other states are evaluated from this point of view unjustly, because we don't understand some further entity is there that is able to observe these 3 states coming and going, not coming with the first one, or even going with the last one. And so relativity of perception as a principle has to be applied to this whole thing. So what is this level, this lowest level of meditation? It leads to quick rebirth because it is focused on this waking life as seen to be the whole of reality. But of course, with the ethical strength and consequently greatness, we are reborn in a higher state, or a state conducive to carry on all our desires, driven by desires, driven by the mind we have learned. We carry on our journey. The example I always gave, supposing you're in a taxi going, say, to the airport, and your taxi breaks down, you don't abandon the whole pursuit. You take your baggage, that is all your learned experiences from all your previous existences, going all the way back through all the species, and you put it into a new taxi and off you go. A new body is acquired. Even though you may have spent your earnings in the meantime in another place, still you go back. And so the intermediate level of self-knowledge then, that in between, is akin to meditating on 2 letters of Om, Om. And that is, the intermediate level of self-knowledge leads the person to gain ethical behavior and the world of the mind, manas. Equated symbolically by the world of the moon is the mind. When we say lunacy, we're referring to the luna, the mind. And it is often recorded that at full moon, people go a little bit irregular. It is said that many crimes are committed during full moon, not only because of the increased luminosity, they have more to do under cover of night, but also it affects mental states. Surely, if the moon's phases affects all the rhythms of the earth in the form of a gravitational influence on tides, it can also affect all the other things. And so the world of the mind. Then, of course, you first enjoy the heavenly life equated to dream, and thereafter you're born in the world of man. But the person who meditates on all aspects of the self, that is all three syllables, Aum, reaches the full self-knowledge of, which is freeing you from all suffering. Once you know these three states, in other words, once you have this view, which we can, for convenience sake, call the station master view, understanding these three balls that are being thrown up, waking, dream, dreamless sleep, waking, dream, dreamless sleep, being the station master standing on the platform and observing these things. So one question would be that in the three states which are observed of coming and going, that one would not have come or gone. I am the constant knower. If we hammer this a million, billion times until it becomes a habitual point and position, then I can assert I'm unborn, I'm immortal, I'm constant. I don't increase, I don't decrease. I don't come, I don't go. Then the critical problems beset in the COVID virus, such as the concern for suffering and birth and life and death, they simply do not arise. And I am proof of that because I feel I am existent. And I know I am the witness of these three states. Otherwise, I would not be able to recall them. That I had a peaceful, deep sleep, or I dreamt this or that or the other, or I did this yesterday. So where do I go when I die? This question cannot be answered from this point of view. I may have a sentiment, of course, that I will die someday and arrange a funeral and all of these kinds of things. But I'm not inside a compartment. I'm not inside any of the compartment of the trains that came and went. I'm outside. Am I not inside the body? No, I'm not. If I'm inside the body and I dream, then I can't get out of it. If I'm inside the waking state, I can't get out of it. If I'm inside the deep sleep, I can't get out of it. I'm permanently there. There's nothing to explain any transition between any of these states. So therefore, if I understand the import of these three states as Om, then I reach my full self-knowledge. I'm liberated from all suffering. The question of suffering doesn't arise. In which state will I have to ask? And all the sin and fears and so on, they all go, and I reach then the world of Brahman. Such a person beholds the soul as universal, pervading all creatures and eternal, says this Upanishad. This Upanishad also symbolically likens the three states of knowledge to a set of three, being awake, dream, or dream sleep and deep sleep, three pronunciations, Tara, Mandra, Madhyama, that is true, but high tone, unclear, but pleasant bass, perfect, middle, pleasant, true, respectively, a kind of mild, medium, strong, basic, ultimate, in between, but, the ultimate position, that of witness. Now that leads us then to the sixth question. And I said I would try to dispense with the Prasna Upanishad to give you an insight and stimulate your interest into studying it further. But the sixth question is like this. What is immortal? The immortal in man is essentially the purport of the sixth question. And here we come to a wonderful universal statement that we are made in the image and likeness of God. But what does that mean? How do we interpret this? We are born in this language in the image of Prajapati, the Creator itself. We are literally born in that. That is, what happens on the small microcosmic level in our own experience happens on the macrocosmic level, equating to all these states of being and equating to the components, the universe components of the universe itself, because the universe is not separate or different from this Prajapati. That has to be understood. Now, this question opens up with a story that tells about an ethical issue. The story begins with a prince visiting one of the students and asking, "Where is the person with 16 parts?" And the student confesses, "I don't know. I don't know this question. First time I've come across it." And the ethical precept behind it is, answering with untruth when one doesn't know the answer, of course, is wrong. We should be bold enough to admit if we don't know something, I don't know. Many people take the egoistic stance and say, well, I know, and they don't. Or I think I know. No, if you don't know, you don't know. Of course, today, many things, if somebody doesn't know, immediately they go into a thumb exploration. That means they look it up on Google. Instantly, we carry these phones around, and the internet is instantaneously accessible. And you have to be careful when you answer a question that is the accurate, right answer, where somebody is instantaneously, while you're talking, before you finish your sentence, going to the Google. Who knows all? The all-knowing, all-seeing Google. And there they find the answer. But you cannot get freedom through Google. That's the difficulty. This transcendent aspect is not available on Google. It is not available through information. It is not even available through meditation, nor is it available through prayer, nor through karma yoga, nor through any effort. These are just there to clean the mind, and the only thing that can reveal it is that self-revealing entity that we call this eternal, immortal self. And so, admitting I don't know, the student asked then the sage, Pippalada, the same question is being asked. And the sage is answering that he and in every being has 16 parts. I have 16 parts, you have 16 parts, and the whole universe has 16 parts, and Prajapati also has 16 parts. So what are these 16 parts? And so in Sanskrit, this 16 parts is relayed as Shodashin. Shodashin, literally one of 16 parts. Man is created in Prajapati's exact image, and innately Lord of creation. So the section states that the soul is immortal. It has self-knowledge, and self-knowledge is really the knowledge of Brahman. That is the highest knowledge. And so that is stated at the very end of the Upanishad. Let us explore what these 16 parts are. Now you'll recall that according to the Sankhya's, the very basic tattvas or categories at our gross level, at our waking experiential level, these 16 parts are the sense organs, 5 organs of information coming in, and 5 organs of reaction going out. That presents us with 5 and 5, 10, but they are useless unless they are related to objects. 5 objects are there also. And how do we interpret and understand all this? The 16th is mind. So let us see the exact thing. Even here within the body is that person in whom these 16 parts arise. See, the self of the 16 parts becomes in the Sankhya system the Linga Sharira, that is the subtle body. And so this is the subtle body that has 16 parts also. Anyway, this person thought in himself, in whose departure shall I be departing? And in whose settling down shall I be settling down? Kasmin va pratishtiti pratishtasyami iti. Sa pranam ashtutta. He created life, what? From life, faith, ether, air, light, water, earth, sense organ, mind, food, and from food, vital vigor, austerity, hymns, works, worlds, and in the world's name. In other words, we are born from the world's soul, Hiranyagarbha, or Prajapati. Hiranyagarbhayam sarva prani karanadharam antarya atmanam. Shraddha or faith comes, and then the material elements come from this. The faith, the will, the trust, the assertion, and all the others come from it. In other words, mind and all the others come from it. And then nama is mentioned, suggesting individuation. The soul exists, souls exist in the world soul, in their subtle condition, and then they acquire embodiment of the gross condition. It comes to my mind a wonderful description. What is the distinction between Jiva, the soul, and Ishvara, God? And Vivekananda gives this description. I've seen it elsewhere also, that the soul is like a circle whose circumference is nowhere, but whose center is in one particular place. Ishvara is like a circle whose circumference is nowhere, but whose center is everywhere. So just as the names of rivers are lost in the sea, so are our names and shapes lost when we reach this divine one, and all these distinctions go away. The Rumi says it like this, that your drop may become the sea. None has knowledge of each who enters that he is so-and-so and so on. The great Christian mystic Eckhart, not Eckhart Tolle, that's somebody else. Eckhart Tolle has taken Eckhart's name. This is Meister Eckhart, the great mystic. He says, when I go back into the ground, into the depths, into the wellspring of the Godhead, no one will ask me whence I came or whither I went. There's a beautiful prayer put out by Christina Rossetti. Lord, we are rivers running to thy sea. Our waves and ripples all derive from thee. Ain't nothing we should have and nothing be except for thee. So we can imagine these parts to be like spokes of a wheel is another image that we can use. And indeed, this Upanishad says, Ara iva rita nabhau kala yasmin pratishtitaha tam vetyam purusham veda yata mavu mrityo parivrityataha. In whom the paths are well established, like spokes or as spokes in the center of the wheel, know him as the person to be known, so that death may not afflict you. Then, of course, this whole Upanishad concludes with a very beautiful conclusion. In fact, each question has closed with a certain standard conclusion. But this says, Tam hovacha itavad evaham etat param pramavida nataha param asti iti. To them, then, he, that is Pippalad, said, only thus far do I know of that supreme Brahman, and there is nothing higher than that. In other words, how in words will I put it now? Because that supreme Brahman is transcendent. And there's an impossibility then to explain any further. Titam acharyantaha tvam hi naha pitta yosmahakam avichaya param param tarasyasiti namaha param rishipyo namaha parama rishipyaha. And they praised him and said, you are our Father who takes us across the shores of ignorance to the land of knowledge, if you will. And our celebration not only to you, but to all the supreme seers, all the great rishis, Parama Rishibhyo, Namaha Parama Rishibhya, salutation to those supreme seers. The teacher who helps us to know the truth is the spiritual father, is distinct from the physical father. Jam Sharira Matram Jalayati, so says Shankaracharya. So we have come to the end of our brief study, very brief study, of the Prasna Upanishad. And I hope you made some sense of it and got some inspiration from it. All these Upanishads not only answer queries and questions and give us solutions to profound difficulties and problems, not just those labeled that are dedicated to questions, Prashna Upanishad. That Upanishad dedicated to questions, 6 questions being posed. But there are many, many more questions and sub-questions. But this Prasna Upanishad has covered all questions we're likely to ask. It is only up to us to reflect then on them and the answers. But more importantly, not only elucidating the principles, but all the Upanishads gives us wonderful material for contemplation that ultimately leads to meditation. Picking up any theme from these Upanishads and taking them on a meditative journey, we will ultimately discover this great, great Supreme Self that is alternatively called Purusha, that internal self derived from Purna, fullness, and Puricity, or Atman, simply self, and Atman and Brahman, the same entity. This is the whole purpose of our life. This is the whole thrust of our journey, our human journey. And this is where every single atom of the universe is moving toward. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.